It was a rainy October evening in Chicago. Wind swept yellow leaves and scraps of old newspapers through the empty streets. Jacob Wright sat alone in his cramped apartment above a coffee shop, staring at his worn-out camera bag. His last photo exhibition had flopped. Critics had called his work soulless, predictable. The only person interested offered him a pitiful $50 for a series of 5 prints. Then came a knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps, as if a hammer struck wood. At the door stood a courier dressed in a uniform straight out of another century. A deep burgundy coat with gold buttons, like those in 19th century photos. Without saying a word, he handed Jacob a scroll, wrapped in real papyrus, turned and left. A sweet, smoky scent of frankincense lingered in the hallway long after he had gone. Inside the scroll was a letter written in what looked like dried blood on yellowed parchment. The offer was astonishing: $10,000 for one night of photography inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The conditions, however, were unusual. No electronic devices, no assistance, and only one specific camera provided by the client, dated to the late 1800s. The next morning, Jacob was on a flight to Cairo. The Egyptair plane landed in the middle of a sandstorm. The airport was strangely deserted. No tourists, no workers, just security and one elderly man in black sunglasses. Without speaking, the man pointed Jacob toward the exit, where a vintage black Mercedes was waiting. The driver introduced himself as Ahmed. He looked like someone who had spent his whole life in the shadow of ancient secrets. They drove in silence for nearly 3 hours, even though the distance to Giza was less than 20 kilometers. Ahmed occasionally glanced at the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, the car stalled in the middle of the desert. Ahmed stepped out and lit a cigarette with trembling hands. Jacob noticed something disturbing. The driver was missing both his pinky and ring fingers on both hands. "They like photographers," Ahmed said quietly. "Especially those who bring new technology. The last one came with a digital camera. All we found was the lens, fused into the pyramid wall, like it had always been there." When they reached the pyramid, the silence was suffocating. No wind, no animals, no sound, not even the crunch of sand underfoot. The moon hung low and red in the sky, huge and unnatural. At the entrance, a tall man in a black suit waited for them. His skin was grayish, his voice hollow. "You're 47 minutes late. That's a bad sign. Work quickly. Here's your camera. Don't lose the lantern." He handed Jacob a large boxy camera wrapped in leather in a green glowing lantern. The camera smelled of mold and old fabric. The lantern flickered like it was reluctant to shine. From the moment Jacob stepped into the darkness, everything changed. The walls were warm, almost pulsing like skin. The air smelled of frankincense, rotting fruit, something metallic, and something else entirely, something ancient. He walked deeper, noticing the light dimmed in some corners, as if shadows consumed it. On the walls appeared images, not carved, but somehow developing like photographs. One in particular stopped him cold. It showed his face, but with black, hollow sockets for eyes. He was alone. The suited man had vanished without a word. Then came the voices, faint, like they came from under the earth. One voice, deep and endless, whispered, "Those who capture eternity become eternal." He entered a chamber of mirrors, old, cracked, covered in dust. Yet they didn't reflect him. Instead, they showed visions, He was in Cairo photographing the pyramid. He knelt before a golden throne, surrounded by figures in animal masks. He was in his Chicago apartment, holding a smoking, burning camera. He found the king's chamber. The granite sarcophagus was sealed, which should have been impossible. Fresh claw marks scratched the lid. Something had tried to get out. He took the first photo. The flash illuminated everything for a heartbeat. The walls shimmered with moving hieroglyphs, wet and blood red. In the corner stood a tall figure in flowing robes, face hidden behind a golden falcon mask. The camera came alive. Its shutter clicked on its own every 30 seconds. Jacob stood frozen, unable to stop it. The third photo showed the falcon mask turned toward him. The fifth, skeletal hands gripping the sarcophagus. The seventh, Jacob himself, arms raised as if in devotion. He turned and ran. The corridor split. One path went upward, the other downward, toward a place that should not exist. From that direction came a voice, his own voice, speaking ancient Egyptian, and somehow he understood. The last photo taken showed Jacob standing before the now open sarcophagus. He didn't look scared. He looked at peace. Dozens of translucent hands reached toward him from the walls. 3 days later, Bedouins found him in the desert, 20 kilometers away. He was alive, but his hair had turned pure white. His pupils no longer reacted to light. The old camera found beside him had 66 images on it. There should have only been 12. The final photos showed Jacob dressed in Pharaoh's robes, seated on a golden throne. Priests surrounded him. One image was dated 1887. In his jacket pocket was a tiny papyrus scroll. Now you are part of history. A week later, a photo exhibition opened in Chicago. Jacob hadn't sent anything, but 12 photographs were displayed. One of them showed the street outside his apartment. Zoomed in, a faint phrase was visible on the wall. "You are now part of history.